Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Heart of Scrolls podcast. My name is Smogan, and after being absent for just a few weeks, I'm very, very happy to be back hosting and chatting with all you guys. Today, our discussion is going to center around deck building. We are going to talk about how to generate good ideas, how to turn those good ideas into a real deck, and then finally, how the new wild resources on the test server may affect all of that. Joining me tonight are three of the best and most innovative deck builders in the Scrolls community. First up, we're very happy to have Ivalice back on the show. Ivalice is working on quite a few new decks right now, including a Growth plus End of Reason deck on the test server using those wild resources, and also some really good Poison Decay builds that he takes into the ESL tournaments. And I believe he's one of the only ones that takes those Poison Decay builds into the high-level tournaments. Welcome back to the show, Ivalice.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here again.
And next up, we're very happy to welcome Sisp to his first Heart of Scrolls appearance. Sisp has been playing Scrolls since the very early alpha days, and has always been on the forefront of innovative deck design. Some decks that he gets credit for are the original Gojo decks, some Decay Energy mid-range builds, and also a old-fashioned Growth Energy sweeper deck based around Clock Library, Rallying, and other shenanigans like that. Great to have you on the show, Sisp.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, we have our third guest, Blinky. Blinky has had his hands all over some of the most beloved and most hated decks of all times, including the original late game order deck with Mangonels.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The original late game order deck with Mangonels, as well as an infinite slew of memorial decks like Go Draw, God Draw, Electrify Draw, probably some other draw decks that I'm forgetting about, and so on and so forth. Glad to have you on the show, Blinky.
Glad to be here.
All three of our guests have lots of experience putting together some really strong decks, and I'm very excited to have them on so I can learn from them, so you all can learn from them as well. A big thanks to the three of them for coming on the show, and of course a thank you to all of our viewers, both live on Twitch and those joining us on YouTube. So, enough rambling from me. To start us off, I'd like to ask each of our guests to describe a deck that they are currently working on building or have just recently built. Each guest will briefly describe the process by which they came up with the idea for the deck, as well as how it is working out. So, Sisp, if it's all right, I'd like to start with you. What is the deck that you've been working on lately?
Well, due to time constraints, I'm really just working on one deck at the moment, which is my current ranked deck, and that's the Structure Energy without the Divinator deck that seems to be doing fairly well against mono energy ranged, which is one of the goals, and it also kind of beats Decay. Not that anyone plays that at the moment, but it just does.
And this is that deck that famously uses a not so useless contraption, correct?
It does. I have a bit of a crush on useless contraption, I have to admit. It's
You might be the only one.
I might in the future, I might even be tempted to run it over Forge. So that's how much I love it. Yeah, it's an underrated scroll for sure.
Some might say it's even useless.
It's not as useful as useless as people think. I think it's that if you look at the health to cost ratio, it's the best in the game, and it also there's with that magical 4 health, there's not a lot of things that can kill it at once. So it's fairly easy to drop together with the big play and energy, like attacking with a giant or dropping it in front of a turn 2 Hired Smuggler, for instance. So it's it kind of fills a gap when you just need a cheap blocker, and all the other stuff does the powerful things.
Well, you've innovated the past, but I'm not quite sold on useless contraption yet, but maybe you'll convince me, who knows?
Yeah.
Blinky, I'll go to you next. What kind of decks have you been building lately?
Well, I've been trying to get my mono energy build right, and I think I have done, almost. But the deck I'm trying to get right at the moment is mono decay or just a decay build, because that seems to be struggling right now. So I've started incorporating growth into my deck. Added frost scales like Bloodline Taint, so I can get a comp going there, trying out erodes, fertile soils, all sorts of things. So hopefully that'll work, and with the test server patch as well, might become a thing. You never know. But it's doing okay. It's struggling still, but I'm working on it.
So you heard it here first, guys. Even when Blinky builds a deck, sometimes it struggles at the start. It takes a long time to get to the point where it's down in the metagame.
Well, I think it'll take a long time. We'll see.
So now I'll shift over to you, Ivalice. What kind of decks have you been working on?
So basically, I've been finishing my energy deck for ranked, but since I'm not the best energy player, I mostly took cues from Blinky, from Magpie, so it's it's almost the same as they play. Maybe there's 1-2 card difference, but nothing very special. But the deck I won't call it my baby, but at least I don't see it played that much. It's a growth deck that uses End of Reason with growth tokens to as another board clear basically. So I think I've perfected it as much as I can. So I'm done with that. So yeah.
Definitely out in left field a little bit, to use a baseball analogy for my few American viewers. So let's speak a little more generally now and go back to the very beginning of the deck building process. For a lot of folks, just coming up with ideas is a challenge. For others, deck ideas just seem to flow very naturally out of them. Me, I am the second camp. I have a hard time coming up with ideas, but I'm a lot better at taking an idea and actually doing something with it. So, Blinky, I'll start with you here. How do you go about generating ideas for all your decks?
Two ways. When new scrolls come out, I think that's quite fun. How does that interact with what we've got already and what's come out now? Or just through general testing, stick like all the new scrolls together and test them out. I think that looks quite cool. Let's abuse that sort of idea. And it's just through general testing and theory crafting. The more you play, the more you get to learn how things work and just get a good idea of what would work well together. It's like take Bloodline Baleful Witch. That does 1 damage for each curse value on a creature. So what goes well with that? Bloodline Taints. There you go. How can I abuse that further? Maybe more curse goals or frost scale, that could work well. So it's just putting ideas together that you build up over time. Is how I do it.
Is that similar for the other two?
Yeah, kind of. The difference is, I think the biggest difference is this. For example, Blicky has a lot of playing experience, and I find the more you play and the more time you spend, the more like you naturally see these combos and that those cards you can use very easily. So that's a huge advantage he has over most of us. But yeah, I think the general idea in deck building is just putting something together, playing, then tweaking it, and redoing again, and so on.
Yeah, it's similar for me. I think it's sometimes sometimes the see this new card being released or something I find that either I see played against me and I see I can do something better with that, or that I find something that's fairly underutilized. But there's also those moments where I think I figure something out about scrolls. I remember Gojo's was an attempt to break the concept of if you stop ramping at like 3 or 4 resources only, and then the idea was that the 2 cards per sack is fairly overpowered compared to traditional games, and you want to get into that point where you can do that and drop everything you draw at the same time. Usually the resources actually in general I feel is the constricting factor, not the amount of cards that you have in your hand. I seem to be playing with a lower hand count than most, I think. I think that's also something that newer players struggles with a little bit, that they don't balance the ramping and the card draw properly. And then Gojo's was trying to make it an extreme. I mean, if I just stop at a very early count and play mostly 1-cost scrolls with a few 2-cost scrolls in there, how much early aggression can I put out, and can they really deal with 3 creatures a turn even though they're small? Yeah, it's an interesting deck. It's definitely not the best in. I don't think it's been close to the best in any meta, but it's always had a few good matchups. I mean, it was good against Godro, for instance. So yeah, but it's sometimes it's like that, and recently it's there. I have some another couple of theories now that I'm trying to figure out if I can do a deck around. But
Well,
it's
that
those are a little bit fewer and far between compared to like starting up, for instance, of a base. I mean, the current one I'm doing right now is basically. I noticed that the two scrolls in structure energy that actually beats decay is charge coil and state machine. All of the other stuff you can actually do without. But if they can't remove those two, then their whole plan of dropping creatures doesn't really work. So I tried to build a deck around those parts just, and then see how many structures I need to play to be able to do machine chant, which is the key scroll I think to structure energy, not actually the divinator. The machine chant is more important. So yeah, it comes from different angles I think when it comes to like a seed for a deck, and a lot of them are pretty bad. They turn up to be nothing really. And some
well,
of them
that's
take,
okay.
yeah, you have to have
So
a few.
one of the seeds that you mentioned that I'm particularly interested in talking about is identifying a hole to exploit in the metagame, for example. So you talked about Gojos and how you wanted to just test, can other decks handle me taking advantage of this mechanic?
Yeah.
What kind of decks have you guys tried to build recently that have tried to take advantage of one of these holes in the metagame?
I don't have an
Yeah.
answer for that. Well, it's not really a hole. I would say it's more a counter to what's popular. That's how I'd put it. So we've got mono energy being the dominant thing. So you think, well, monogrowth worked quite well last time. Let's try that again. What specifically in energy is weak? It's low health, so maybe throwing frost gales in there.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. That turned out not to work too well, but it's worth a try. If order was a thing, then I would think, decay, that would go in with bloodline taints and poison things. That's more what I'm looking at. A whole as such has been aggro decks in scrolls. So that's kind of trying to be filled with a new like aggro growth enchantment deck, which is okay, but it's struggling still. Not enough sort of cheap units for that to work. I don't know, whatever. They can talk then.
Well, I have like two ideas how to counter energy basically. One is the good old poison decay. I think I could basically use the same build I used to counter growth. So lots of poison and mostly that's it. I don't even run Necrogeddon in it, so I just rely on poison for board control and just trying to keep a few units alive to deal some either damage. And as Blinky said, the other thing actually, you could try to out rush basically energy with some kind of growth aggro rush deck. I have a build that's very heavily based on enchantments, but I would say it's strong, but it's very drought dependent. If I could maybe play it with mulligans, maybe I could pull it off. But right now, if I get a bad hand, it's over. It's basically, if I get a good hand, I can win. If I don't, it's over. So that's that.
Well, that actually brings up a really good point. And I apologize, this wasn't on the list of questions I gave you guys in advance, but how does mulligan affect your deck building decisions?
I think no, it doesn't. It makes. I had the current state on the test server right now. I haven't dabbled too much with the wild, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But actually, the mulligan itself kind of helps multicolor a bit or multi-resource a bit to get those ramp cards that you need early. So, for instance, the mid range I use, if I get a energy siphon in the starting hand, it plays completely different from when I don't. So if you have one of those like linchpin early game scrolls that you need, mulligan helps it a little bit further with that. If you don't have those dependencies, then you don't gain that much out of the mulligan. So some decks benefit more, I think, than others, but it doesn't really change the deck building that much. I think that still it's very important to have a strong early game for pretty much every deck. I do believe that sometimes people tend to build a little bit too much late game decks when most games are actually decided in the opening turns. So it makes sense to focus a little bit more on that and making sure that those work. And Mulligan helps the certain decks to achieve that more than others.
Blinky, what do you think about how Mulligan affects deck building?
I don't think. Well, it hasn't done anything for me so far. I haven't really tested it out
What
too
has
much.
it done for you lately?
I haven't really touched Mulligan too much. Yeah, I haven't built any deck around now being able to Mulligan. It hasn't affected my decision whatsoever.
Fair enough. You also mentioned earlier that there is kind of a hole where aggressive decks tend to be in the metagame for most trading card games, but in Scrolls, there really isn't a way to win before turn 8, turn 9, turn 10. What other lessons can we take from other trading card games that might apply to Scrolls? Do Scrolls decks tend to fit into these traditional aggro combo control archetypes, or are there different archetypes in Scrolls?
For one, it's tough for Scrolls to have an aggro deck because all our creatures are twice as slow generally. We've got Countdown, they attack every 2 turns instead of in every other TCG, they attack every 1. So that doesn't help. So for more aggro decks, we need to be more aggressive creatures. But then to balance that in the overall scheme of things is going to be tough. But that's not my job, which is fun. It's just breaking things. It's mine. I'm not too familiar with other TCGs to know too much. Hearthstone I've dabbled in, but that's just more streamlined. I mean, Scrolls is just so different in terms of since it's got the board, it's hard to say. So I'm not going to guess.
Well, Sisp, I know you have a background in Magic the Gathering. Do you see any crossover lessons between the two?
You too. Yeah, I think it's. I see a lot of the card evaluation, Scrolls evaluation. I promised myself I shouldn't say card today. I failed already. It's only like 18 minutes in. Damn it. Anyways, a lot of the evaluation I do is based on like previous TCG skills, and I think that Blink is right in that it's much slower than like Magic, for instance, where you can have turn 4, turn 5 kills even in standard. It's much harder to get that into Scrolls. We did do in Alpha. I remember that we did the early gold fishing tests. Goldfish is when goldfish is basically when you run a deck against an opponent that does nothing and see how fast you can kill with an ideal hand. And the Goyos was one of the attempts also to try to goldfish. That was the deck I built that goldfish the fastest. If you don't have an interacting opponent, it could kill by I think turn 5 was the earliest, but that's a completely crazy hand, and usually it was 6 to 8 reliably. Whereas a lot of the other efforts were later than that. So even that's with the component that does nothing on turn 6 to 8. I mean, at that point, when you ramp normally, you can usually have put a Tribesman, a Rot Eater, a Cursemonger, and a Witch Doctor in play by then, and that's not even unlikely at that point. And if you have those kind of roadblocks, it's really hard to push through damage. That, and also that the removal is much more expensive in Scrolls than it is in other TCGs. Removals are actually usually more costly than the creatures that they remove. So that makes it hard to make an aggro deck. That being said, I'm a little bit tempted to call the direction that Growth is going in. They're trying to push that as the premier aggro deck, and if you count them now with an Owl just being added with Countdown 1, you have now 4 creatures that have Countdown 1. And you also have 2 creatures that have natural haste, so you might not need to play Rallying or Gadhan anymore. And Crimson Bull is going to be really good in that deck. And enchantments too. Enchantments are twice as effective on those as well. So it might end up in a situation where Growth is playing Magic and all of us others playing Scrolls with their creature attacking every turn. So that could be a possibility that the true aggro deck can break out. That or something close to the earlier tempo order, for instance, where you can have countdown manipulation to break the rules of attacking only every other turn. So
That makes sense.
Yeah, there's something out there soon, I think.
So let's assume now that we have generated an idea for a deck. Maybe not an aggro deck right now because that's so difficult to build, but you've either identified something missing in the metagame, something that you want to build to counter one of the popular decks, or just some individual card combos that you want to try out. Now I'm interested in figuring out how you go from a good idea to actually putting it into a stack of 50 scrolls, turning it into an actual deck. So Ivalis, I'm interested in your process, like the physical process of what you do. What does it look like for you personally when you are actually putting together a new deck?
So basically, mostly if I have a deck idea, I put all the cards I want in it, and it's usually way more than 50, and then I see what I can remove without totally like breaking it, like what I can leave without, because there usually are more cards you want to fit in a deck than you actually can if you are trying to stick to the 50 card limit. So that's one of the steps. And the second step, I would say, is actually then looking at the resource curve, basically where I have like too many, maybe I have too many 2-drops, then I will maybe switch 2-drop for 3-drop, 4-drop, something like that. Yeah.
Blinky, does it look similar for you, or do you have a different process?
In terms of trying to build an overall deck, maybe, but if starting off with an idea, usually I look to kind of abuse a single scroll in itself first. So say I like Seed of Insurgency, say, as an example. I'd be looking to like build around that card. So I think what would work well with that, things that enter into play and have an effect. So Sister of the Owl could work, Sister of the Fox. Then I'd look at is it Earthborn Mystic, I think it's called? Then that adds to it, and it kind of builds around there. Then I kind of look at the formation of a deck and adding things going on there. So there are different ways to approach it. I tend to start when I'm building a deck, looking at the ideas and combos of the deck and how I want things to interact before looking at the overall build itself. Which is a bit different actually than what most people do, but it works for me.
Yeah. Something I'm also interested in is in identifying particular roles for different scrolls that you want them to play. So if you know that your deck should have 18 removal spells or have 6 early drops, do any of you try to fill in from that point and then just fill in from there?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the normal routes I do with a deck when I try to really tune it is to try to figure out what scenarios am I winning in, especially early. For instance, a lot of my energy decks are based on having a turn 2-drop reliably, because I know that I'm going to have a turn 3-drop in energy. That's not the problem. And also it's going to be fairly beefy usually, like a Forge or a Hellspitter or a State Machine or something like that. I have something to put out there that can block. And if I can have then a creature that costs 2 that can drop on turn 2 reliably, then that's a fairly strong scenario for me to start with. I have 2 guaranteed damage going out on turn 4. And if that creature is, for instance, a smuggler, then those 2 damage are going to do work regardless. Either it hits the creature or I get to draw a scroll. So smuggler, for instance, works really well in that plan. And then I'm willing to play that even though it dies to decay because the rest of the decay is good, for instance. So it's just sometimes having 3 then is not enough to be reliable. I mean, Gun Automaton is probably one of my most played energy scrolls of all time, just because it fills that role very well and it doesn't die to a lot of the stuff that can be thrown out that early in the game to it. So I'm trying to figure these scenarios where I want to go. And then I try to cut down on the top end usually to play less expensive scrolls and try to because you can always, I mean, some of the scrolls are really more powerful than this cost. For instance, the Automata Forge is good regardless when you draw it, even if it's late in the game. It's still better to drop an Automata Forge, for instance, in turn 4 than most other stuff. So it's usually around scenarios and trying to figure out where you're winning and where are you when you are losing, what are the scenarios then, and then trying to make sure that the deck steers in towards the winning scenarios.
Something that all three of you mentioned, but in different ways, is how important it is for the decks, the scrolls that you include your deck to all fit into your particular plan. So Sis talked about this, knowing what his turn 3 plays are going to be and planning his turn 2 plays around that. Blinky talked about this with Seed of Insurgency and knowing what scrolls might that go well with to fit a general plan. So would you say that knowing your plan is one of the most important parts of actually building a deck?
I would say not maybe a plan, but knowing how you want it to work slightly different. Usually when I go with a plan, it never sort of goes out. I like the deck as a whole to work. So like when I'm building a mono decay deck, I know that the best way to build it is just with strong creatures, and that'll be my plan, is to put decent strong creatures down. So I'd be looking to build around that. So like we've got the Witch Doctor, decent strong creature. That works well with humans, so we're going to go with humans. So the 2-drop option, which we have 2 of. We've got Boghounds, Tribesmen, Lord Darkling. 2 of those are humans. We'll have those in instead. So it kind of all works together. So a plan builds around the overall focus of the deck, in a way, if I've explained that correctly, which probably happens, but I tried.
No, that makes sense. So you're looking for synergy, not just at the individual like 2-card combo level, but rather throughout the entire deck and leading to probably more consistency.
Well, you can go back to that idea of like aggro, mid-range, or late game sort of variations deck. You know how you want it to be, and where it's going to be that sort of focus area. So if you're going aggro, you know you're not going to run God Hand, or if you're going late game, sort of old Mangonel's old job, you're not going to run like Roland Frigimon or something. So you kind of shift the area of where the deck's going to be, and roll out scrolls immediately. And just know where you're heading. If you have a decent idea of what you're going to do, scrolls themselves will naturally be included and naturally be excluded. T.
Something else that I have a list that you mentioned, so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about this, is the cost curve or mana curve or resource curve. Basically, how many of each expense of scrolls you include in your deck. What advice do you have for people for building an effective cost curve?
Yeah, well, basically the thing about curve is actually that's the thing that basically determines your deck's plan in that way, because if you're going up to only 4 or 5 resources, it's an aggro deck. That's basically determined by the resource curve, because at that point when you reached your top resources, you want to just sacrifice 4 scrolls and keep drawing, and you don't plan to go late game with such a deck, and if you do, you're mostly losing at that point. But if you're going up to, for example, 8-9 resources, that's clear, that's a late game deck, and you mostly what you want to do with your earlier scrolls, you want to stall the game as long as possible to get to this late game where you are more in a better situation, basically. So that's what you have to think about when you think about resource curve. And you should always try to make it even, not leave, like, for example, any holes in not having 3 drops or 4 drops, and just smooth it out overall.
Sis, for Blinky, do either of you have anything to add to that?
I think that the combined plays are important to think about as well. I mean, a lot of times you think about a resource curve as being only stuff that you can play. You can only play like 1 card that costs 2, and then you play next turn you play one scroll that costs 3, and then you play a scroll that costs 4 and 5, and that's a perfect game. But maybe the key plays that you do 2, 3, 4, and then on turn 5 you drop a 3-drop and a 2-drop, for instance, and that's where you gain the tempo. So that's also where I think that people should probably play a little bit more inexpensive scrolls, such as Useless Contraption, so that you can have that, you can drop the blocker and the attacker on the same turn and actually gain a tempo on the board. So you basically cheat a turn there if he's only dropping 1 creature a turn.
That actually makes a lot of
Yeah,
That makes a lot of sense because one of my early decks was the Energy Range deck way back before it was good. This was like 6 months ago. And I discovered quickly that one of the most powerful plays I could make was one of these combo plays. It was the Cannon Automaton and Bombard on 9 resources. So my plan became, how do I get from 6 to 7 to 8 to 9, making an effective play every turn while still not going way too far behind in cards.
Yeah, I mean that deck doesn't want to trade 1-for-1 for the entire game, and it's the same thing also with like for instance Order. I think that the turns where the Order takes off is when they can start dropping like on 7 for instance, or 6 when they can stop dropping 2 really powerful 3-cost creatures like a Spearman and a Skirmisher for instance, and then take off really. So getting to that state fairly early is good, and that's also why it might be a little bit tougher for stuff like Champions, for instance, to impact the game, because as I see it, it's rarely about, in Scrolls are rarely the limiting factor. It's usually the resources, and the Champions, even though they're really powerful, there's usually a lot of plays, for instance, for 8 energy that can do combined plays that are as strong as them. So harder, more costly Scrolls need to be really powerful for them to really work, I think. Yeah, that's all I have. I think that's enough.
Yeah, you said everything I wanted to say, so that's that.
Well, very nice. Well, there's a discussion going on in the chat, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to save some time for our discussion of the new wild resources and multi-resource decks in general. But there's a conversation about what exactly an aggro deck is versus a tempo deck. Does anybody want to weigh into what they think about that?
Go for it,
Well,
sis.
go
have
on, go on.
I will take it.
Oh, okay, go for it. Go for it. Tell.
I did when I did the deck types post around the beta release. The definition I used there was that the aggro deck is trying to play its own plan. It's trying to basically kill the opponent as quickly as possible, so that opponent's plan doesn't really take off. It's trying to not care about what's on the other side of the board. Whereas a lot of the decks that we have today are slow enough that they have to play something which is closer to like tempo order or aggro control in the regular terms. That it's trying to play efficient threats and efficiently remove the opponent's threats, so it can win. It basically starts to stay in a state where if I play a creature and you play a creature and I remove your creature and still keep my creature, I'm one creature ahead that's constantly attacking you. So if I can keep that board state, I'll win. That's usually what you define as tempo. That you try to not be like miles ahead of the opponent, but you try to be at least one step ahead of them and finish the game in time. And then late game or control is more of like, I kill everything you put out, I'll clear the board, I'll lock it down, and then eventually I win with anything, because at that point I have complete control. So I think that's usually the 3 main one. Combo is a little bit weird. Combo is, and traditionally it's usually like aggro, because it tries to kill you as fast as possible, but there's no combos in Scrolls that are actually kill combos at the moment. There's been like powerful synergy combos, but not any kill combos like the stuff they have in Magic, for instance, where you have turn 1 kills of broken combos. So it's a little bit different, and it's probably good that there's not that many combos, because we have this thing called the board. And if that is irrelevant, I think it's a completely different game. So it's probably good that we don't have those. But synergy combos we don't have, they don't mind. Those are what makes the game fun. So
I feel like the Memorial combo decks are the closest thing to a true combo deck we have.
No, I think it's more like a control. It's more of a control deck. I think it's trying to really clear everything, and it kills with Memorial some of the. I remember being electrified on the test server at one point. But I mean, at that point, whoever was piloting that one, there might be someone here in the call, could really have killed me with anything. I mean, it didn't need to be electrify.
Could have been a beast rat.
It doesn't need to be electrify corrode at that point. It can be pretty much anything at that point. So
you might electrify corrode alone.
Yeah.
So
Any other? Go ahead.
Yeah, so if you're trying to like put it very simple, a real aggro deck is a deck that mostly goes only for idols, ignoring creatures. A control deck will mostly try to trade creatures and gain advantage in that way. So that's just
Yeah, it's pretty much. I mean, if you play an aggro deck and then you kill the game and you empty your hand at that point, it doesn't really matter that the opponent still is holding 8 scrolls and have more resources than you because the game is over. But if it goes past that point that when it's stabilized, then how many scrolls they have and how many resources they have start to matter. So that's the thing with Goyos as well. I mean, it really comes out fast and try to kill idols, but if it peters off at that point, the opponent stabilizes. It's usually like down to doing some really weird flip combos or something like that to have a chance of sniping it. But it's at that point you're pretty much lost. So, but the whole idea around the deck was really that if I can have enough tempo on the board, I can kill you so fast that it doesn't really matter what you do. But it didn't start off as trying to be an aggro deck. It started off as trying to be a deck that drew a lot of scrolls early. Caught myself there. Should have a counter here with how many times I say cards.
Oh, that's okay. I slip into the MTG terms basically every podcast. People are just going to have to get used to it, I suppose. Last question on this topic before we move on. This is from the chat. The suggestion is that Mojang has built more of a tempo game, whereas Hearthstone has built more of an aggro game. Do you guys think this is a correct characterization, and does this give either game a better foundation?
Blizzard, Hearthstone is a game. It's just normal. It's not meant to be anything. But Scrolls, being as it is with the board and the countdown, it's just going to be slower in itself. So they haven't deliberately set out to build like a tempo game, as they put it. As I said, with the countdown as it is, and how the board interacts and things, it's going to be slower. So until Mojang bring out faster creatures, and bigger spells, it's going to be as it is. So I don't think we've naturally gone out to. I think Mojang haven't gone out to build the game as slow as it is. I think Blizzard have gone out to build the game to be quite fast and linear. That's what the impression I guess of from what I've read. But I know for certain that Mojang haven't wanted the game to be as slow as it is. Hence, testing grounds and things we're doing there.
Trying to speed it up and whatnot.
Yeah.
I actually wouldn't call Scrolls. Yeah, I don't know who came up with the term tempo game.
Yeah, it's not a very good way of explaining it, but slower is how I put it.
I actually see like the most usual mono decks are actually they are control decks. Even Growth that's more aggressive, it still uses its aggression to trade creatures and get advantage that way. So it just tries to control the board. It's more like all games are control games mostly. So the only like the really deviations from that are aggro decks and combo decks mostly. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it is slower than a lot of games when it comes to like. But it comes a little bit from the board as well. I mean, if it was much faster, the board would matter less. I think then creatures would just trade one by one, and formations and stuff would matter less. So it'd probably be less interesting. It was if more stuff had countdown 1, we would probably play out very differently.
It's interesting that if there was only say one idol, or there wasn't the board aspect sort of lining up thing as you put it, the game would be less interesting, less skillful, more boring, but it'd probably attract more people. Sadly enough. But that's how things go.
Maybe not the right people.
No. Maybe not.
No, but it is definitely I personally don't have a problem with the pace of it, but it's or I wouldn't play Structure Energy, but I mean it's the I never play Goyos all the time, but the problem might be that is there enough variety of, like, if you only have mostly tempo decks, do they differ enough that it is not only cosmetics around the factions? And I think that they have found a fairly good balance now of the factions are starting to diverge a little bit. We'll see a little bit on this countdown 1 on the Growth if it continues to be a thread. But they're starting to diverge a little bit more now than they were before. If they can clean up some small stuff a little bit more and then make the resources even more pronounced, I think that it's fine that every deck is a mid-range to control deck. We don't need the aggro decks that much then. There will still be like more aggressive versions of aggro decks that can beat the go draw decks, for instance. I mean, that's one of the ways of beating slow decks is killing them enough before they can set up really. So I think we'll have all varieties, and I don't think it's necessarily just a tempo game. It's there's more to it than that.
Well, thanks to all three of you for your insight on that. Sorry, go ahead. You have one last thought on that?
I actually wanted to go a bit off topic. There's this interesting thing that I read recently that Faeria, another digital card game, they changed their whole mechanics from a system like in Scrolls where creatures don't hit back to every creature hitting back the creature attacks it, like in Hearthstone or MTG, and they said they did that in order to speed up the game and make it more dynamic. And I've been thinking how that will affect Scrolls. It will, of course, it will first completely break all the scrolls and stuff like that. But
I think it would make Scrolls slower, wouldn't it?
That's an interesting idea to think about how
if everything had spiky.
Yeah.
Well, it's not spiky, but yeah, in a way.
Well, all the creature would just die and no damage would get done, effectively, wouldn't it?
But if you wanted to keep board presence, you will need to avoid trading and attacking. So you will there will be more decisions when you will think, do I want to attack or not?
I think that the difference here with MTG is that the blocking is mandatory in Scrolls. I mean, you can line up in front of something, so you can use creature for removal. Whereas in MTG, I mean, the opponent blocks when he likes to or needs to by the board state, but it's always a voluntarily block. And if you had the hit back mechanic, it could be really hard to still have the need to block mechanic, and that kind of would break the entire game, I think, with regards to positioning. So it's tough to get. I think it's really hard to get that. Yeah, don't break my game. Don't do that.
To break my game.
No, I think that would probably be a very different game at that point. So I'm fairly certain that they won't do that. But
well, they're
again,
already.
Yeah, they're spiky, so. You can have that flavor if you want to.
Well, before they try any really major changes like that, we've got to talk about the changes that I think are one of the biggest changes that have ever come to the test server with this new wild resource. For those that aren't aware, and I think most of you in the chat probably are, the wild resource is a way to increase the viability of multicolored decks, at least in theory, where you can sacrifice a scroll in your hand for a wild resource up to however many your lowest current resource is. That's kind of hard to explain, but it makes more sense when you watch it on a stream. But anyway, with this, the goal of the new wild mechanic being to encourage true multi-resource decks, do you guys think it's going to accomplish this goal?
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks. End of discussion.
I'm here. Don't worry. I'm here. I'm okay. I think it's going to be a difficult balance for them to find, but we'll find out. We're going to have to take out all the ramp scrolls and start redesigning them all again, maybe increase the cost hugely. But we'll find out. It's going to be interesting. Ivalize, go.
You go. Well, I think we have different opinion. I think it's going to be decent only for splash decks, and we won't really create a new multi-resource deck meta, at least. I think it's gonna help those decks that work now as splash decks. Those decks will get a slight boost, but otherwise, I don't think it's that strong.
No, but it is strong. Effectively, if you're playing 2 resources, your second resource below cost is effectively doubled. So every time, if you're playing, say, Growth and Order, every time you sack for Order, being the second resource, you're effectively getting 2. So, like, I can now put Imperial Resources in my Growth and Order deck quite easily because I can just go to 3 Order, 3 Wild, because whenever you sack, you always keep Wild up with your second resource because it can be played for either your main resource or your second one. So you're never losing anything. There's never any downside to that. So since you're up to 4 Order, you can play Imperial Resources. I mean, there's no downside at all. So it is dead easy to now create a multi-resource deck. But there is a problem in that it might be too strong and too easy now.
I wouldn't say dead easy.
It is.
But maybe for you. But I think that they did achieve one design goal that they had probably, and that is that the problem with tapping resources or deciding how you spend your resources if you have multiple choices there is that it's really admin or bookkeeping, and you don't want to have that when you have turn timers as well. I mean, that's probably one of the least appreciated parts of Magic, that you need to tap all the lands all the time and then untap them again. And the Scrolls that's all that bookkeeping for you. And I think that they did a really good job of doing an interface where you don't have to choose, but you still can see how it's going to affect before you do the play. There's no if you haven't noticed on the test server in the notes, they also added the preview there when you're playing your Scroll, that you can see how much you'll have left. And that they've set out to do. They did create a very strange, interesting system, though. I think it's fairly telling that it's really hard to explain it. That might mean that it's maybe not the final solution here, because it's tough to explain exactly how it works, and it's not exactly new player friendly, I would say. And then it also creates all of these weird things of the new splash being a 2 cost now instead of a 1 cost, for instance. Now we brought back Podder and Transposition again. Yay! Because we all remember how fun it was when every deck was splashing those cards. So
yeah. Well, if I can give another example of how deep you can actually go in splashing, rather multi-resource. The old Decay and Growth deck, we actually say go up to Rat King or whatever. You can, if you go to every time you go for Growth, you can then go for Wild, obviously. So you're essentially still ramping into Decay. That is the good part of it, because you're never losing. Every time you're sacking for Growth, you're losing your main resource and how much you can do there. So you just need to get to 3 Growth now, so you can play Quake. You can play Growth at 3. You can play Quake at 3 Growth, essentially. That is how good it is for me.
We're entering into very dangerous territory here now, because one of the things that they're holding back, not that, but like, for instance, we go back to that old dragon of MTG again. One of the things that they're always is holding back, like multi-resource decks, not just playing all the good cards, is the mana bases. That less reliable mana bases actually gives you losses in the end, in the long run, because you'll have those weird draws and you have those additional mulligans, etc. So it kind of brings down your win percentage a little bit when you start doubling out the mono resource in Magic. And since you have perfect ramping in Scrolls, when it comes to the natural ramping, you can always pick what resources you want. It's like you're drawing your perfect lands every time in MTG. It's dangerous that it could go into the territory where you'll have the clear best Scrolls and you can fit them into those decks. And you might end up, instead of having a meta game of different decks trying to do different things, you'll end up with a few that are doing very, very similar stuff, because it's allowed to. It basically crushes the borders between the resources, so they lose character out of that. And it's a little bit more dangerous here in Scrolls.
Big gray mob.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a Scrolls deck just, and then there's a clear best one, but it might not even come to that. It still probably is a deck that beats that best deck, etc. So there's flavors to that rippling out, but the resource line could become very, very blurred, I think.
Maybe.
But the thing about multi-resource decks always was that in order not to lose tempo, you needed like cards that ramped you. You tried not to suck for the second resource, because that's how you lost the tempo. You used Return to Nature and cards in order to generate that second tempo. and that's still faster than sacrificing maybe for the wild resource. So if you're sacrificing for the wild resource, you're still losing tempo compared to mono decks. So that's why I'm thinking it's not so bad. If you sacrifice the tempo for a later advantage, it's okay. Maybe they're stronger, but I think they still will lose in tempo to the mono decks. So
Yeah, because I mean the idea now when you do multi-resource is that you add so much draw and 2-for-1s that you make up for having those extra turns where you sack for resources. I mean, for instance, the ED mid-range I did was, I think it was like 28 scrolls or something like in there that either 2-for-1s or better, or draw scrolls. So I mean it's and then it also runs 6 ramp scrolls. So it's and that's needed to make up for the fact that you're into 2 resources, and it would be, I mean, it's either that or you have a very low curve then, for instance, like Gojo's, where you stop early and then you can start you instead get your scrolls from the sacking, so you end up stopping and stacking for scrolls earlier. But you need all of that to make up for the fact that you are slower in the early game compared to a mono resource deck that can get to that point where it has everything that it need faster. So it's a little bit, I don't know if that's the kind of multi-resource decks they want either. I mean, only that you need to have that much draw. Maybe Wild helps that a little bit, so you can have multi-resource decks that don't need to run all that draw and ramping, but it's very hard to tell at this point, since there is so much stuff that is probably not balanced for Wild at this point, like Memorials, for instance.
Well, it is early days, isn't it? So it's hard to say.
I mean, if this goes live, then I think it could be. I think they probably need to change Memorials at that point too.
Maybe.
Yeah, but they're starting to feel outdated at that point in terms of multi-resource technology, I think, and you have these weird interactions now where if you get, for instance, if you're playing two resource and you get your correct Memorial on the draw, then on turn 3 you can sack for Wild and be on the same turn as you used to be in terms of your main resource, but you can also be on two in your off resource. So I mean, it's a very powerful play now to play that second turn Memorial on color. So
yeah, that does seem very, very potent.
It's a little bit the same with Siphon and bigger extraction, but that is at least conditional. I mean, they have to have a creature out. So it's tougher with Memorials, I think, and some decks will be very, very tough with abusing them. I mean, they only end up in abused combos for some reasons. So there's something wrong. There's something wrong with them.
So let's say, and I'm sure that this probably won't happen, I'm sure changes will come and there'll be lots of balancing, but let's say that they took this to live next week and just got rid of Memorials and made no other changes. Would anyone play mono decks anymore, or would everybody go to multi-faction decks?
People would still play mono deck, sure.
Yeah, for sure.
It's tough to say because there's just so much speculation about what would happen. So I'm going to try not to say anything.
I mean, there's viable multi-resource decks now, but the problem is that they don't have the right matchups. Like the mid-range crushes order, like you felt that today, Smogan, on the test server. I mean, it crushes. it crushes order like 80-90%. It's a really, really good matchup. It might even be higher. I think I don't remember when I lost order last time with that one. But order isn't playing on ladder, so why play that? And it's the same thing with different things. I mean, we can go back to Gojo's again. If Gojo was the best deck, then Gojo's could be a pretty good counter to that, because it's a fairly it matches up very well to the kind of removal that Gojo has, but it's not a thing. So then it's not played. And it's just that if there was a multi-resource deck right now that could reliably beat mono energy range and growth, for instance, growth with tokens, then it would probably be played. So, and the possibility there is one out there, but it's much tougher to tune that one, I think, than
I think we're in a dangerous situation here that Rebellion's only just been released on the main server, and Wild's only just been released on the test server. So we've only had like a week and on live server or so.
Yeah.
And like a day or two on my test server. So everything's speculation. We don't know a lot, if anything. So there's a danger in going too far with our thoughts, I think. So we'll just leave it at it's interesting. I think it's hard.
That's actually a really good point. First impressions are all we have right now. So a lot more testing needs to be done, both on our end as test server folk and on Mojang's end on getting this figured out.
It's
so we have
probably
a couple.
the meta is gonna probably flip at least twice or something like that. Even based on if you just have this pool that we have right now without wild, and they don't do anything to power trip. I think even with that, it's probably pretty possible that there is a deck out there that reliably beats the top decks in ranked right now. But
Exactly.
it's so early in the meta. I can remember how slow it was in alpha because there was a lot less people playing then, and how we came to the conclusions like very in a glacial pace almost and the meta game changes very much, and that was pretty much with the same card pool for a long time. I think it's just a few weeks off before we see one of those shifts, even without wild being released.
Well, that's a good point. After Judgment came out and the ranking reset and everything, it was all growth all the time, and then Decay came out of nowhere, and that's all people played.
Yeah.
So we have those shifts coming. We just need a couple of people to build those decks, get them on ranked, get them out on Reddit and Scrolls Guide, and get them popular.
I mean, Energy is getting played most of all because it got the coolest scrolls, and everybody else, all the other factions didn't get as good a scrolls. So Energy is now playable. People want to play it. That's fine. There may be a deck out there that beats this Energy deck quite easily. It's yet to be found. Mono resource decks may be better than this new wild stuff. Multi-resource factions hasn't been tested because everyone's going to be testing the new wild stuff. No one would want to play mono resource decks in testing grounds. Why would you? You must be testing out the new wild stuff and interaction. So don't treat it on face value, as I'm going to say. Just don't go jump into conclusions, although conclusions are generally right. It's
That
just
makes sense.
a danger in saying such and such. Oh, drawn decks are going to take over. We don't know until everything's been tested.
So check out this awkward transition here.
Okay.
You're saying that jumping into conclusions can lead to things going horribly wrong, right? So sometimes
depends who's making the conclusions.
Sometimes when we build decks, things go horribly wrong as well. And we've got a couple of minutes left on the show, and I want to kind of end on a more fun note. So I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about a deck or two that you've built in the past that have not gone well, some bombs, so to speak.
I don't like to talk about this.
Admit your failures.
Tough topic, no, but you live by your losses. Yeah.
EO Joes, that didn't go too well. Magma Pack on Scattergunners.
That sounds so
I
awesome.
can't imagine why not. It could be pretty good now. I should bring it out again.
Maybe.
Machinated is really good in that. I mean, it is a lot of damage on a stick, for sure. So better than Magma Pack. You get to keep your creature. So could bring it out again.
Maybe.
I won't bring out
my Magma Pack.
Yeah, I won't bring out the Eye of Copper deck again.
Eye
That's
of
probably
Copper?
the most epic fail. Yeah, it was probably the most epic fail.
Only
Anyway,
one creature and it's
win.
Copper Automaton. Is that what that was?
Yeah.
It was Copper Automaton and
with
Eye of
Magma
Eagle, and trying to get to that. It was basically my attempt of actually building that combo deck. And it was way too slow. It was comically slow.
It was removal, Eye of Eagle, Copper Automaton, Magma
Like
Pack,
on turn 10, you could finally can do your Magma Pack Iron Whip combo and get one idle, and then you only had to do it twice more.
Oh man.
So like turn 40 kill. No, it wasn't really exactly the definition of combo I had earlier, right? Where you were faster than your opponent. You were pretty much not faster than any deck.
I can just picture how excited you were building that deck and then how devastated you were the first time you tried it.
I could feel that I could see that I need to try this probably to prove that it didn't work, but I didn't have high hopes.
Sniping idols with the Copper Automaton
I didn't go for ranked with it, no.
It used to be a thing though, didn't it? Having Copper Automatons on with Magma Packs in the mono energy deck. That used to be a thing.
Think about Corrode. Corrode.
Corrode.
I want Corrode to be good.
It
In
is.
some sense.
Nerd totally beat
No.
me. One time.
Aren't
No,
you
it's
actually the
not.
Corrode master? What's going on?
It's not. No, I think with the problem with Corrode is that you can have. I mean, if you have concentrated fire or machinated or desperation or all of the other stuff that do similar stuff, I can also hit Dilos. You can also hit creatures reliably, and Corrode just does one thing pretty badly.
Ivolis, do you have any decks you're willing to admit to that failed miserably?
I think my saddest failure was actually that it was God or Dog Drow deck with Scavenger, Construct, Animivore, and us to fit memorials around it, and it was my way to ramp. Then kill my own memorials and draw cards that way. And the only lethal thing I had my deck. I don't think it was the only creature, but the only lethal thing I had was Darklings. So that was my win con.
It's funny, my
Glorious.
version of Faith Chains work. So you're just looking at the wrong win con. Was this
No,
before?
the win con wasn't important, but
Was this
the
before or
fact
after
that,
Necrogeddon wiped the board?
that was Necrogeddon was 6 though then and it was
It was
okay.
still so many husks. Was it?
I think it was at the time when the Watcher cost 2 and dealt 3 damage still. So I had Watchers in there too, maybe, but still.
See why that failed.
So mostly no creatures. Just it was basically like 3-color
dark.
structure deck without energy, which makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah. Sounds fun.
So the lesson to take away from all of this is that even the best build some hilariously awful decks, and it's okay if you build awful decks too. That's part of the fun of a trading card game.
I mean, it's not a bad deck if you learn something of it. Like
Good point.
maybe one creature is not enough. I've learned. I did try that after actually. I have tried only Solemn Giants and 3.
Eye of Eagle.
Yeah, Vic is shaking his head. 3 Eye of Eagle. Yeah.
I remembered all these things.
It is funny because then every time you draw an Eye of Eagle, you know exactly what you're getting.
Yeah, Solemn Giant.
And then you play only structured. Yeah, don't try it at home. But it's there is. I mean, if you learn something of it, then it's fun. Even if it's like a bad starting effort that you learn that okay, but this didn't work. But hey, Vitality Well seems pretty good.
Hey, there you go. One thing I learned from a
it
recent deck failure
triggers
of mine.
off rallying. Okay, I didn't know that. It turns rallying into a semi. Well, it gets the healing part of Imperial Priest. So, I mean, you
That is
always learn
definitely
some
a
stuff
combo I
about.
have never played.
This was viable at the time when we tried to beat Order and Spiky with growth. Then it actually came into play a bit.
Well, talking about learning from your bad decks, I tried to build a deck recently around the name that I created for it. I was so proud of myself for coming up with the name Dojo for Decay Order Joe's deck. Tried to build that, failed horribly. So the lesson is do not build a deck around a name, build a name around a deck.
That's good because I normally call my decks just like Zhug. I just bash my keyboard for the names of my decks. So that's never going to work for me.
I always get so excited when I have a really good name for a deck, but it's always like sometimes the name is better than the deck itself.
Right.
Like,
this is one of my primary criticisms of the
Order
Scrolls
was
community.
one of those. Fallen Order felt really. I mean, that was a great name for a deck. Great name for a bad deck.
I had a good one for Wolves, which was Charge of the Bite Brigade. I was quite happy about
Nice.
that. There you go.
I kind of like the approach of naming decks based on the key cards. So my growth energy end of reason deck is called Growth Reasons. So kind of like that.
That's how growth reasons, by just exploding and killing everything. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I guess. But
I really want to build like an entire series of different decks around Earthborn Mystic now with like Languid Mystic, you have Magma Mystic, you have Mark Mystic, with the
Unleashing
Mind
the Power
Mark.
Mystic.
What's that?
Unleashing the Power Mystic.
Yeah. Mask Mystic, obviously, best combo. Reaping Mask.
So this is our challenge to the community as a whole. I am tired of playing Mono Growth. I am tired of playing Mono Decay. I want to play something with a cool name. So if you build a deck, come up with a cool name for it when you do your write-up. Okay, everybody?
Or else.
I see Stoner
else.
Order in chat. That's a great name.
Absolutely.
Stoner Order.
Stoned.
Okay. Well, that is all I have for you guys besides a few final plugs that I want to throw out real quick. The Bracken Brawl is tomorrow, the finals for that. We've got a couple people on this call, I think, are going to be playing that. We have the Badger Guild versus, is it Strategic Angels that we're facing off against?
Yeah, strategic angles.
The Angles or the Angels, whatever you want to call them. Either way, they're strategic and they're coming after our crown, and we're going to try to fend them
Coming
off.
from all different.
From all different angels from all angles. Oh my
yeah.
gosh, I need to wrap this up. My jokes are getting worse and worse and worse.
You're in a good crowd for that.
We have a lot of streams to advertise, of course. We have Blinky's stream and that's the Owl stream. We have our Heart of Scrolls stream that you're on right now for the Badger Guild. We have NRP does all sorts of stuff, as does Cantor in our guild, and Clever Us is one of our new additions that does a lot of streaming. Outside of our guild, we know that the Rats and Bunnies have a stream that they do a lot. The Think Tank has a stream they're on occasionally, and then Orangey has some good content. He was one of the people doing the Wild Resource streams right after it came out. So if you're interested in those streams, both the Reddit and Scrolls Guide have applications on those sites where you can see who is streaming right now. So check that out and give it a follow. And what am I forgetting, everybody? What else do I need to advertise real quick?
Scrolls.
Oh yes, there's this video game called Scrolls that you guys should play.
Monsters
check
just
that out
turned up, by
sometime.
the way. So
Yeah.
Tournaments, Dragon Ball tomorrow. Watch that on the stream. Sunday SG Open tournaments. Watch that. And then other things are happening soon. So look out on Scrolls Guide, because I have lots of posts which are going to be on the news, which should be fun.
Lots of stuff happening in the community. Everybody needs to get hyped.
You do. I'm not.
All right, everybody. That's all we have for you. Thank you to our guests for joining us on this podcast. Thank you to all of our viewers, including those that came in the last minute and a half, like certain devs. That's all we have for you. Everybody go out and go play some Scrolls. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.